Okay, hello and a very warm welcome to everyone today to the webinar looking at the lessons from the 341,000 odd lights across 97 Australian councils. My name is Lex and I'm the Business Manager at Ironbark Sustainability, and today's other presenter is Paul Brown, the Managing Director at Ironbark. Before we get started, we're going to cover off on a few housekeeping issues, since I know for many of us this is our first webinar. First, note that only presenters can be heard during the presentation, and because we are using the wonderful world of technology, I think I might just ask again, how's the clarity of volume and audio going, everyone? You can, yep, good, thanks, Paul. Good, Sandy, thank you, excellent, Thomas, that's enough. Thanks, guys, we'll get moving. You can always jump into that question box at any time during the webinar. If you've got any issues around the audio, and of course if you've actually got questions around the webinar content. We'll try and answer everything as we go along. Depending on the number of questions, we may wait until the end to answer them. So it's a little question box that you can see there. You just type it in, press return. If you are asking questions, please try and be as specific and clear as possible. So throughout Australia, there's a bit of an energy efficiency revolution occurring, with local governments installing energy efficient street lighting such as LEDs to replace old, inefficient and inexpensive technology. The lights are being changed over in their hundreds of thousands. It's only been the last few years that these projects have really exploded into the mainstream. Given that street lighting is the single largest source of greenhouse emissions or energy use from local government, more councils around the country are looking at proven successful models and want to start seeing action. This webinar will not be about what is theoretically possible, but about what is actually happening on the ground. There's a lot of talk around street lighting. There has been for over a decade about the barriers and the excuses and the politics, which have always been around, but we know now the projects can be implemented and can be completed. And from our experience, councils certainly are much more interested in getting things done and getting projects delivered. So in this webinar, we're going to be talking about getting projects delivered. It is great timing. There's a lot going on. We're rapt to be here, and there's a lot of experience around the world and around the room. At the highest of levels, the Climate Group, an international organisation that tries to move and accelerate action on climate change, has put the challenge out for all public lighting around the world to be LED by 2025. They've got little asterisks there, or as energy efficient. So anything that can deliver the sort of savings that LED does. Just quickly, some of you out there might not know us. We're around to work with councils to facilitate real sustainability outcomes for councils and communities. We only work with councils, and we're really only interested in projects that deliver. Just so you know, we don't make street lights. Street lighting is an area that we've worked in for a very long time. But we work on broad energy efficiency. We certainly don't make lights, we don't maintain street lights, and we don't want to. We don't approve street lights. So we're talking generally about DNSP or utility-owned lights. They're the guys that approve them. We did some surveying before today's webinar, and this is a bit of an idea about who's in the room today. A great mix of different states. We also asked, what are the key barriers that you face? Now, here are some of them coming up. Don't worry about reading every single thing. You'll get a bit of a flavour from some of these points that come up. And after this webinar, we'll send round not only the presentation, so the presentation will be made available to you, but we'll send all of this information as well. This is sort of word for word what people said. What we've done is we've summarised it for you. You're getting a bit of a flavour there about the things that come up over and over again. Here's our summary of what everyone said in advance of the webinar. The main barriers: DNSP. Oh, hello. Wait a second, someone's asked me if there's a video with this webinar. I'll just put another quick question out. Oh, okay, there's a few. I need a welcome screen. Bear with me, guys. Thanks for pointing this out. There we go. I bet you're getting it now. That better? Yep, thank you. Apologies. This is all you missed out on. And we'll be sending it around. This beautiful picture of the Ironbark staff here. That's us, blah, blah, blah. This is who we work for, etc., etc., etc. this is the breakdown. So this is the slide that you missed, the first one. Majority of councils here attending today from New South Wales, then Vic, SA, Queensland, WA. As I said, you will receive these afterwards. I will just speed through these. This is the feedback that people gave us. The reason I'll speed through it is because we have summarised it for you in this wonderful table here. So this outlines a summary of the main barriers that councils, that you guys, that the attendees today came up with. And this is really consistent with the sort of barriers that councils have been facing in street lighting for a decade. So we developed the Energy Efficient Street Lighting National Strategy a couple of years ago. We were engaged by the Feds to do it, and as part of the development of this strategy, we collated info on barriers to improving lighting via a nationwide survey, and there were 200 odd organisations that responded, which is pretty consistent with the complex nature of this. And the barriers were cost, capital cost, expertise, dealing with the complexity of street lighting, and working with external stakeholders. Now, over the years, DNSP, by the way, stands for Distribution Network Service Provider. So you could also have the word utility or DB or distribution business in there. Essentially, there's 5 in Victoria, 3 in New South Wales, 1 in Tassie and South Australia, 2 in WA and 2 in Queensland. So they're the guys that own the electricity networks, and for the main, they own the lights. Look, one by one, these barriers have gone. The capital cost barrier has slowly moved away as these projects have moved into the mainstream and prices have gone down quite considerably, as we'll talk about in a second. A couple of things that also helped that capital cost barrier go down was funding through the federal government 4 or 5 years ago. I know we've got some people from the Feds in this webinar today. You guys are responsible for a lot of these projects that got off the ground. So the federal government federal governments of a variety of colours over the last few years can legitimately say that they are involved in a lot of the LED streetlights that are up at the moment. We've seen capital costs also reduce as a response to what's been happening on the international scale as well. The knowledge barrier has gone because as we've all gone and started to implement these projects, we've learnt more. So at the moment, we've got 15 or 16 staff just here in this office that work on energy efficient street lighting. There are also people within councils, given these projects that have started rolling, that had one job, which was to develop these broad regional street lighting projects. And the final one, the relationships barrier, or on that previous slide, that would have been the DNSP. Essentially, if you argue with the DNSP or if you argue with your stakeholders, you will not get any projects done. Once you stop arguing, projects start to happen. A couple of years ago, or last year actually, we were invited to provide a proposal to a state government, and they wanted to know about all these barriers and how to get around them, and we thought, this is great, this is right up our alley. We're the street lighting guys, so we'll put in the usual stuff. But we thought they're asking the wrong questions. They're still trying to find barriers when literally out the front door, if they turned around and looked outside, they will see that the solutions are there and things are getting done. These no longer are just numbers or projects that might be funding pending some approval or into discussion. These are projects that have been completed, new LEDs that are out there. In fact, every single one of these councils, they're there for everyone to see. You can go and Google any of these guys. We can go through and send you links to all the projects. They're promoted pretty widely within the communities, but we don't have time, but you could do that yourself quite easily. In the US, about 13% of all streetlights are LED. In some areas of Southeast Asia, there's some big changes afoot at the moment. Internationally, about 1% are LED. A mob called IHS Technology stated that of about 140 million lights installed a couple of years ago, 19 million were LED. So although there's a long way to go, we're kind of ahead of the curve a little bit. We're going to have a quick look around the states. We do have a variety of states, as we said, in attendance today. So in New South Wales, noting that while most of the states, apart from currently the Northern Territory and WA, sit under the same national electricity market and general rules, there are some pretty massive nuances, and that might be a bit of a contradiction in terms, within the state. Often within a single state, there will be contradictions, especially where there are multiple distribution businesses. In New South Wales, light years ahead has been the biggest project. 14,000 to 15,000 odd LEDs, Northern Lights, an inland New South Wales project. And there's been a lot of lights in the essential energy area changing to 42 watt compact fluoros, which we haven't actually counted all of those in our numbers. So far, all of these projects have been delivered with the distribution business owning the lights at the end. Now, ownership is something that comes up quite a bit in street lighting. Councils are the ones that pay for the electricity and the maintenance. Distribution businesses own them. Not ideal. A lot of councils have tried, and we'll get into that in a second, to retain ownership of the new LEDs. So far in New South Wales, we tried, but without luck. In Victoria, we've seen the most number of lights for a variety of reasons. This was from a few years ago, 232,000, it's now 269,000. And at one stage, we thought this was the second or biggest street lighting project in the world when taken cumulatively. It didn't take long for India to come and break our party. They've got their own little counter, 1.14 million street lights at the moment. We've got a better logo than theirs though. I think that looks that great. And mind you, they've got another 19 million to go. Again, these are projects that are done and dusted. We're talking about things that have been completed. Warrnambool, the first council in Australia to actually switch all of their street lights to LEDs. In Victoria, there are actually only 7 councils that have not completed a project now. In Queensland, Ipswich were the first to change to LEDs. Brizzy did their CFLs a couple of years ago, and there are another couple of councils that are preparing at the moment. There's some great work that's going up in Queensland at the moment. Some of it involves working with Energex, the distributor, or the DNSP in southeast Queensland, where they actually have some interesting models and are trying to look at council ownership of the lights. Tasmania, Hobart and Glenorchy are done, and there's a project that's been rolled out through the local government association down there, which will end up resulting in up to 30% of the lights being LED by the end of 2017. South Australia, there's been very little. A few trials. City of Adelaide have done some great things on the lights that they own. So they're parks, gardens and council-owned lights. There have been no bulk changeovers. However, as of last week, the City of Marion passed a resolution, and it has been carried unanimously, where they will be the first South Australian council to transition all of their lights to LEDs, which is fantastic news. Excuse me. In the ACT, they've been doing a lot of trials. It's a little bit different because the state government is the local government and they own the assets already. And they recently went out to market to look at management and maintenance of the lights and the change over to LEDs. In South Australia, there have been some small LED projects. They're also under transition from their own energy network to the national grid, which will mean they'll come under the AER, which will hopefully open up opportunities for Western Australian councils. And Northern Territory, another state not part of the national grid, 22,000 odd street lights that are going to be going to the councils on the 1st of Jan 2018. Mind you, I should mention that there's at least 1 or 2 councils that have said, no, we're not interested and we don't want them. All right, just a reminder, you can keep the questions coming. There's something around, yep, we'll come and have a look. Thank you for all of those. Add them all up and we've actually now got 350,000 light years ahead. Is a small project in Western Sydney only. Thanks, Paul. 13,000 done, 60, 70,000 odd to go. Certainly it proves that it can be done. And watch this space. I think you'll see some pretty interesting things coming out of West Rock in the not too distant future. Okay, so there are a few things that don't work. This is an example of what has happened in the past where councils and council stakeholders, and myself and ourselves included, have struggled to deal and work with stakeholders, especially those that are, for better or worse, a lot bigger and uglier than councils are, and that is the DNSP. So in 2004, a bunch of councils sitting here in the blue corner, represented by Mayor Quimby, went to the regulator, the Australian Energy Regulator, and said, we think that written down value, or residual value, which is an amount that has to be paid out when you take down a light, we think it's too high, it's unfair, you should remove it. AR said no in 2004. The councils went back in 2009 and said, no, we still think this is unfair and too high. This residual value, it's bullshit. There's nothing there residing in the lights. It shouldn't be there. And the Australian Energy Regulator said no. 2011, bit of a trend here. But we really think it's unfair and too high, so you should remove it or change it. And this isn't a comment even on the validity of whether the argument was correct or not, but it's just giving you a bit of a flavour for what happens when the umpire continues to say no. This group of councils took it to the Australian Competition Tribunal. The AER said no dramas, and the Australian Competition Tribunal said no. Written down value or residual value stays and remains. This doesn't work. Arguing with the umpire does not work. You may well be right, you may well think that you're right, but when the umpire makes the decisions, they don't often change them. Once you take off your gloves, you get action. Working with other councils works, and it works very well. So in Victoria, for example, the Local Government Association, the Municipal Association of Victoria, worked on a group tender, a bulk procurement tender on behalf of all councils in the state, which essentially said to the market that there's a lot of projects that are about to happen and about to start, and a lot of lights that'll be out there, and we saw prices come down considerably. Learning from other councils that have completed projects. This is the bright lights of Bendigo in 2012, taken from the hill, one of the hills outside of Bendigo in central Victoria, by an astrologer, I understand, who wanted to look at astronomer. I made that mistake. Who wanted to look at the effects before and after a street lighting project. Now have a look at the glare. We often hear about the issues with glare with the new lights and all the white lights and the pollutants. After the project, this is what happens. This was the astronomer taking a photo from the same place in the same conditions. This is one of the many issues that come up in these projects, and learning from other councils and what they've already gone through is the best way to move because they've completed them. There's a council in Melbourne's East that have a revolving energy fund model at the moment. They've essentially completed their project and they made the case, we've saved so much, we want to use this money for other energy efficiency projects. Take your opportunities while you can. In August this year, Mr. Michael Oak from the City of Yarra was talking at the Local Government Energy Efficiency Conference about the street lighting project that they rolled out 8 years ago when no LEDs were approved and they were T5 lights. They've already paid themselves off. You can only put up, I guess, the technology that's available at the time. Last decade, this was that only the compact fluoro sort of lights were approved. A few years ago, it was only LEDs, and now it's LEDs with smart technology, and there'll be things around the corner. If you continue waiting for the next best thing, you'll be waiting forever. This might be around the corner. Lights on drones that will follow you where you go. Don't wait for them. If you've got the opportunity now, make the move. Working with the distribution business, understanding leads to action, as we've been through before, and having an engineer's view. So this is a great one. I think Voltaire, he gets misquoted a little bit, but apparently he said, perfect is the enemy of good. An engineer, as far as we're concerned, says, perfect is the enemy of delivered. Finally, you need to be prepared. There's a lot of politics. When you bring $100 million or so worth of sustainable lighting to a state, you get a lot of people that come in and want to get involved, a lot of media. They'll be public and they'll be loud. This doesn't necessarily work very well. There's a lot of white noise that you'll find from people that have got the next best thing that's going to save everything you could possibly want. There's no such thing as a silver bullet. You need to ignore the white noise and get one of these. Okay, at this moment, I'm going to move and turn to Paul Brown, who's going to take you through delivery and smart lighting. Keep the questions coming. Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Lex. Okay, so we're just going to talk a little bit about what do you actually do to deliver these projects. We've helped 90 odd councils do these projects. So each of those councils have gone through a very similar process. And this is a fairly standard, straightforward project management approach. Step one is prepare, 2, fund, 3, define or more detailed feasibility, then go to the market and finally manage the projects. For the preparation stage, essentially what you're doing is getting the information together so that your decision makers can confirm or not whether they want to proceed with the project. This is really designed to put simple information in front of senior executive and councillors, and typically involves a business case looking at the variety of options. In new areas, when we have done this sort of work, often the business case will actually say, do not proceed yet, because there are unknowns, like our distribution business won't tell us how much they'll charge for the project. So in the business case, essentially, we'll say, there is an opportunity here, however, you need to fine-tune these numbers in order to deliver it. And that fine-tuning can take a couple of weeks, but usually it's a couple of years. And then you launch into the next steps. And the next step is obviously funding. I'm going to talk a little bit about funding that's available currently. The ERF, Emission Reduction Fund, is now heading to a pause point for next year, where there won't be a lot of projects that can get funding through that mechanism. The projects that could, we're looking at between, say, 5 and 10% of project costs, so it's still not a large component of the project. A number of councils for these programs have access financing. The Clean Energy Finance Corporation have financed a number, and they are a good place to start if you want to talk about financing. We're now seeing some councils use funding from Roads to Recovery to deliver these projects, and that funding stream can deliver 100% of project funding. This is an area of funding for councils which often have a range of things that councils want to deliver, so it's really up to the individual councils to determine whether this is a higher priority than other roads projects. But that's a good one to go for. And finally, at a federal level, the Smart Cities plan was put out by the Coalition at the last election, and we're now starting to see a few of those plans coming through. And it's likely there'll be some funding available for activities, but at this point we're probably looking at that as a bit more of the icing on the cake rather than the cake. There are state-based funding, which I'm not going to mention today, but there are certain states that do have some funding. In general, there isn't a lot of money specific to these projects unless you want to access Roads to Recovery. All right, stage 3 is detailed feasibility defining. And at this point, you're really getting down to the project plan, who exactly is going to do what by when. Also, communications is a really important part. We're talking about replacing the majority of street lights in streets throughout your municipality. So community consultation and managing that's really critical. And it's a big opportunity as well. One of the main parts of the definition stage is to do the design plan. And a design plan really takes into account things like what lighting do you want where? Where are your bicyclists, for example, train, bus, etc., depots? Where is congestion? And where are things like black spots, so areas where you have current accidents? It's an opportunity to fairly cheaply redefine your lighting in your streets. One example is a council in Victoria decided to increase lighting levels within 50 metres of every pub. No other council's done that, but maybe your council will want to. All right, stage 4 is procurement, and this is really going to the market or identifying how you're going to pay for the project. And really it's about lowering that capital cost. There are 2 broad ways to do this. One is to tender, go to the market, and the second option is direct engagement with the distributors, usually. The choice around that is specific to your area. So depending on what the councils want to do, and also depending on what the distribution business allow you to do, then that will define your procurement process. It's a bit of a complicated discussion, so I'm not going to go into any more detail now, but essentially that procurement stage tends to be the same if you're in a certain distribution area. And just to keep in mind, there's 15 distributors in the country. Most states only have 1 or 2, with the exception of Victoria and New South Wales, which have 8 between them. All right, last stage is management. This is actually really the easy part. And once you have the other 4 steps in place, most of your thinking and planning has already occurred. So the management of the project is quite straightforward and a typical project management approach. All right. I'm going to just sort of do a bit of a sidetrack now and talk a bit about smart lighting. Now, smart lighting is something that we are all in the industry grappling with as to what are the opportunities and what can we deliver. Fundamentally, there's a couple of things as councils that we need to keep in mind. One is that lighting is an opportunity to jump into smart cities. And it's an opportunity that's coming up now because we are looking at replacing assets. So I'll jump into that a bit more. All right. When I Google smart cities, these are the first 3 pictures that come up. So it looks like something that is complicated, something that's similar to now but a bit futuristic, looks pretty awesome actually, and something that's very colourful with little clouds following people. So what is smart? First question to ask is, what are we currently doing? So in Australia, we currently already have road signs. We do collect rubbish. So our cities are actually quite smart. When you ask the question of what is a smart city in India, one of the very first things that come up is clean water. Smart cities are a bit of a catch-all for what do you want to achieve in your society and in your infrastructure. So the questions we ask in Australia won't be the same as what Bolivia or India or even the UK or US will be asking. What is known, so Smart Cities Councils is a not-for-profit working globally. What they have said is, we don't know. There isn't a common definition. We'll know it when we see it. But they also go on to say that typically Smart City gathers data from devices. It then shares that data and creates software that is useful, creates valuable information or services. In this example, with the guy riding his bike, essentially he's got a Walkman, or I'm sure it's something far more complicated these days, and he's using the Wi-Fi signal from the street light to download his podcast. There you go, that's more modern. That's one example of what can be done in a smart city. You're essentially looking at these specific opportunities and then multiplying them. Again and again, different relevant projects. Where does public lighting fit into this? Well, one of the interesting things about public lighting is it is wherever there are people en masse. It is also high, physically high on the pole, so that is very useful for communications purposes. And it has power to it already. So it is probably one of 2 pieces of infrastructure which can form the backbone of a smart city system. The only other piece of infrastructure is utility meters. And they are very similar to street lighting, except they are not high on a pole. So street lighting is absolutely a massive opportunity for smart cities generally. What do you need to do to get smart? A couple of things. Distributed scale is the right scale to start talking about governance. The key issues around smart cities are to come to agreement on how to share and use data. This is an absolute question which councils should be in the middle of and discussing now. There are areas where this is happening, where councils are getting together and then putting a position to their distributor on what they want to see smart cities as being. Parramatta has put together a smart city master plan. I'm not sure if anyone from Parramatta is online, but the first 15 pages of this document is pretty standard. The next 15 pages is very interesting. So it essentially moves from generic motherhood statements into here is what we see smart cities being and here's our position on it. Quite a good starting point. If you want to learn about council positions on smart cities, I'd suggest downloading the Parramatta document. The second thing is to encourage your nerds. Smart cities is one of those things where I know a friend of mine, and I know probably shouldn't go into friends of mine, but nonetheless, he loves drones and remote control helicopters. He is now in charge of the drone program for one of the business he works for. So encouraging your nerds, you know, with good management is the right time, and look at what are the opportunities for us. And then honing in very specifically on projects and things to do, pilots. Designing in smart adaptability now is an important one. Dimmable drivers, 7-pin PE cells, these are all for street lights, and including the costs of smart adaptability within any business cases. And the last one is to play smart technology when you are upgrading key precincts. Councils do this all the time. We are now advising most councils the solutions for your CBD areas or key precincts will be different to the unwashed suburbs, but it's an opportunity for you to play with smart lighting and also all of the other types of technology that can be added to that system. So that should certainly be part of any upgrades that you're planning and strategic plans for urban centres. At the same time, play with governance and get your nerds involved. I can see all the asset managers going, no, not the nerds, please not. But nonetheless, with good control, it will certainly help. All right, back over to Lex.
Thank you, Paul. That was fantastic. Encourage your nerds. I love it. Download a podcast on your Walkman. That was gold. We've got a lot of questions, so just bear with me. I'm just going to get to some of them. The first one, someone, and this is one for you, I think, Paul, from Queensland, is saying that there's the issue they have, or the barrier they have, is that they have to pay out this written down value that it was mentioned in one of the previous slides, or the residual value. So this is an amount that the Australian Energy Regulator multiple times has said is staying. And it is an amount that must be paid to a council. This person is saying that it's way too high in Queensland. Can you give any comment on that? Yeah,
sure. So Lex's slide where he talks about Mayor Quimby and the judge was dealing with this specific issue. The Australian Energy Regulator is the one who is the judge, really, in most of these situations on the value of the asset. What happens when you pull down an old light and put a new one up is that the distributor says you need to pay us because there was still value in that light, and the regulator agrees with this. It's essentially like a mortgage. So once you move from one house to another, you still have to pay your bank for your mortgage from the old house. You have to pay it out and then create a new one. That's how it works with street lighting when you pull one down. Our experience is that arguing about it will not change it. If you want to deliver the projects, you will need to pay that out or finance it. What we do is include that within the business cases so that the council can make the decision as to whether that price is reasonable or not. Overall, the overall project, that value, the residual value, varies a lot from different states. So it's you can't do a national business case easily on this sort of project, it needs to be specific to your area because of these sorts of issues.
So have you done any work on Queensland?
Yes.
Is it too high?
So we've done a lot of work in southeast Queensland, in the Energex area. There are a number of councils actively working with Energex at the moment. We found that the business case in southeast Queensland was comparable to other areas, and the written down value or residual value was not a significant barrier to delivering the projects.
Another one from Grid, the same deal. Is that a different distribution business, different state, so a different written down value?
Yep.
So they've said that the big barrier there is that the residual value is just way too high.
Okay, so as mentioned, the residual value changes a lot from different states. For Ausgrid specifically, we're doing a business case for a council now, and they, when we looked at the residual values for them, Ausgrid was actually the second lowest in the country for this particular council. So we're not seeing that as being an issue at all in the Ausgrid area, given that sample of one council.
Fantastic. There's a question about the ownership of the lights. There's a few questions about ownership of the lights. Paul, I might pass this one to you about Tasmania. Someone here is saying they're from Tassie, and they were at a conference a few months ago, and that the ownership has been sorted, and so in Hobart and Glenorchy, they're going to own the lights, and it should be at no cost.
Okay, so ownership is a really complicated question. The general background to ownership is the lights are currently owned by the distribution business in the vast majority of situations. Councils cannot force the distribution business to sell their assets. The state government is the only organisation that can. In the Tasmanian situation, Tas Networks has worked with the councils. The councils worked with them, and now the councils are in a position where they can own the assets. How it currently works is that they own the assets and they have an agreement with Tas Networks to maintain them in the short term. And we'll see over time whether that changes. In other states and territories, as mentioned, the NT, they are moving a chunk of their lights from the distributor to the councils, so Alice doesn't want to get them. And other than that, most other distributors have said, no, we don't want to sell your assets. I think with Tassie, you mentioned at zero cost.
Yep.
So with Tassie, well, I'm assuming the question was around the written down value or the residual value of the assets, or the access?
They've got FAA access.
Okay, so an FAA is a facilities access agreement. So what tends to happen is the distributor is allowing someone else to own an asset on their infrastructure, so their pole. They will develop an access agreement, which essentially says you're allowed to put this on our pole if you operate under these constraints. So it's about health and safety and standards and all the rest. And they also will typically include a cost for that per year. That cost per year, the best example of an access agreement is with the NBN, where all the distributors in the country have agreed to a facilities access agreement with NBN Co. That price is typically around $50 to $60. It varies a lot depending on where you are, and there is no documented information except what's mentioned in the media. So you can't see exactly what it is, but that'll give you a rough idea of access prices. And obviously if that price is higher than the maintenance charge, then there's no business case for you to own the assets and maintain them yourself.
Fantastic. Someone else is saying that they'd heard there was a trend towards councils owning their lights, and they should do the same. I can start by saying that's not really true. So A lot of councils have attempted. So when you install, in fact, we might even have, I won't worry about slides. If you install the new LED, you purchase it, you pay for the upfront capital of that actual light, and then generally you vest that to the distribution business because it is part of the street lighting asset. It's not just the luminaire, it's not just the globe, if you like, and the light, but it's also the supporting infrastructure, the brackets, the poles, the bits and pieces that go with it. So one of the reasons a lot of distribution businesses have not accepted or not been willing to sell or allow councils to keep ownership of the LEDs, they would have to break up that asset into different components. So in Victoria, there were some test cases with the City of Moreland and one or two others behind the scenes that tried to negotiate with distribution businesses, and the distribution businesses at the end of the day said, no, we don't want to be selling parts of our distribution network. The same thing happened in Sydney with one of the bigger projects up there, where a group of councils was trying to negotiate and also use the upcoming privatisation of the distribution networks as a potential hook, but with not much success there as well. So Tasmania is a model that might end up working. It seems to be the most advanced, and there's negotiations there. There's been a lot of discussion as well in Queensland too, some great work going up around the Sunshine Coast. All the people involved there are doing a lot of great work to try and get the councils and the distribution businesses working together. And essentially, the Sunshine Coast, the idea is that they would be purchasing back and owning the assets. But it's not as easy as that, and that's why this is not a trend that is actually happening.
One of the things, I guess, going into the business case side of it for councils who are starting, all of these options would be explored. So you would look at, what if you own it? What if the distributor owns it? What if they pay for it? What if you pay for it? What are the funding? Where do we get the money from? And all those different options should be part of the business case, and certainly we would include it. And then we would encourage councils to think of this as there are multiple ways to achieve the outcome you want, and usually the outcome you want is lower cost, lower energy, and either better relationships with your distributors or better control. So the key thing is keeping an eye on the aims that we're trying to achieve, and that there are multiple routes to those aims.
Thanks, Paul. I've got a few questions. We're going to get to them all. Something around the procurement and the Victorian example where we mentioned that the Municipal Association had worked to save councils money. The council has said that they've got pretty tight or strict procurement guidelines they have to follow. So was this process public? And it was. I can even tell you the contract number, SL9311. We worked very closely with this project. So essentially in early September 2012, the local government association went out to the market on behalf of initially 45 of the 79 councils to say to the market, if you have a light that's been approved by a distribution business, all of these councils don't want to have to all individually go out to a public tender. It's going to cost them time and money, and it will cost you as lighting suppliers time and money. So instead, respond to this bulk procurement panel, and it's a standing panel, which basically means any council in Victoria and Tasmania now can jump online, download an Excel spreadsheet that has prices for different quantities of light, so 0 to 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000, whatever it might be, and then they can simply ring the lighting manufacturer and order as many as they like. It can be well over whatever the Local Government Act limits are, and this was all public and followed the relevant local government rules. Another related question is around the types of LEDs that are approved and how councils can only do these projects if councils only do this if the distribution business allows it. So someone just said that the barrier is that councils don't, or the distribution businesses don't want to do these projects, and they don't approve them, and nothing happens. This is absolutely true at the start. We've now got a situation though where I think every distribution area except maybe 2 or 3 have approved LEDs. In Victoria, certainly there are multiple, 4 or 5 residential category LEDs, and a handful of main road category LEDs that have been approved for use. Paul, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I guess the key thing is that first time you're doing a project in a distribution area who haven't done projects previously, then it can take some time to negotiate the key outcomes you need. And the key outcomes are obviously you need a light, you also need a tariff, and you need agreement around how the project is delivered and pricing of the project. So strongly, any areas which haven't already had 1 or 2 projects delivered, that would be the standard process. And that's why in South Australia, business case 2 years ago, now we are seeing the first councils actually ready to deliver. And that's because it took 18 months or so to negotiate those key points.
Thank you. A question here, will you be discussing whether there is any truth in the health effects to humans and wildlife? I'm assuming this is about the white and blue light spectrum. This person's provided a link. You can always respond later, but Paul, we're not obviously haven't gone through it in detail today. Give us some comment on that.
Yep, so it's probably useful to mention that the AMA, the American Medical Association, put out some information earlier in the year, which said they were concerned. There was concerns around blue light and cancer. The LEDs have a variety. You can choose different types of LEDs, I guess is one of the points. Their specific recommendation, so the AMA's recommendation was, 1, do good design when you're choosing the lights. Choose lights which are well directed, so they've got good glare shields, etc. And then look at the colour spectrum that's coming out of the light. So with any of the projects that we've been involved in or been rolled out, those first 2 items, so good design and reduction of glare, is built into the projects and required. The third one around the colour spectrum is that it does get much more complicated. In the US, their lighting levels are about 5 times the lighting levels in residential areas that we see in Australia, and it's also a volume. It's a volume issue. It's a dose issue as well. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing is that a lot of the original LED projects that were installed were around 5,000 to 6,000 Kelvin, which means very blue. The lighting levels recommended in the Australian standards, that colour temperature is 4,000 K, and they're the ones that are being installed currently. It's something which we certainly recommend that it should be built into your design process. And it's something where we strongly encourage the research industry, so universities, etc., and the lighting industry to keep talking and keep communicating. It's great to have this brought up to a high level so people can start talking and thinking about it. A lot of these issues are already dealt with and are not an issue in these projects, but nonetheless should certainly be part of the design process.
Thank you. Another question from Asha. Do you see hope for the lighting as a service model where a manufacturer owns the light and pays the power bill, so they are incentivised to have long-lasting, repairable products with low energy use? In streets, generally speaking, no. And that's only because of what we were talking about previously around the ownership model. Most distributors currently want to keep owning it. So the customer from a manufacturer's perspective is commonly the distributor, not the council. And so then the model of the manufacturer directly servicing the customer, i.e. councils and communities, it's not going to work. In non-street lighting, potentially, but I think it would still take quite some time for those models to bear out. We are seeing those sorts of models in main roads, so areas where, so Vic roads, for example, in Victoria, currently have that kind of model in their maintenance tenders. Are CFLs considered satisfactory at this stage? i.e. the benefits of replacing these with LEDs are not worthwhile right now. I'm assuming, looking at the person, that was a question from a council in New South Wales where Essential Energy implemented an upgrade to probably 42 watt CFL sometime in the last few years. I guess it depends. The first thing is when they were installed. You obviously have to start taking into consideration things like waste and the life cycle of a light that has possibly recently been installed. Clearly, going from 42 watts to an LED that might be around 18, 19 watt is okay, but it's nothing compared with going to an 80 watt light, which is the majority of the residential lights around Australia. Going from that 80 odd watt light down to 18 or 19 is where you see the big savings. Paul, got any comment?
Yeah, just a lot of councils want us to look at both CFLs, other fluorescents within the business case. So you include obviously your 80 watters, your major road lights now. There are a lot of major road lighting options for LEDs as well as any of your other lights. So you'd simply build the CFL analysis into the business case, separate it out so you can make a separate decision on it. If it makes sense, you do it. If it doesn't, wait until they start getting a bit older, and then it'll be worth doing, within 5 or 10 years anyway.
Good question here from Jeffrey. How does LED lighting affect the quality of CCTV footage? Paul, you're an engineer.
So I guess if you've got good lighting in terms of the colour temperature in particular, then what that'll do is make sure you're getting good definition of facial features and colours of cars, for example. So generally speaking, if you're improving the lighting colour, you'll improve CCTV. To be fair, in most residential areas that a lot of the projects have been delivered to date, it's pretty dark. So you're not going to get a lot of CCTV outcomes. I guess the main thing you've got to be careful of is glare. So if there is a specific installation you want to put in with CCTV, then you just need to manage that glare so it's not right in the video that's stopping the footage.
Another question, I guess it might be a bit related to that as far as the type of lights. It's from the Victorian Council wanting to know whether they can dim our lights, and it's from a council that has already has already installed energy efficient lights.
So the bulk changes that have occurred to date have been in residential areas. The residential lighting levels in Australia, I mentioned before, they were, compared to the UK, they are 5 to 7 times lower than the minimum standards in the UK. They are quite low already, so you wouldn't be dimming. If you wanted to change the lighting levels at all, you'd switch them off, because there's no point in dimming lower than the current standards are.
Right. Paul has asked, getting a handle on savings from LEDs is difficult if lights are not metered separately. How can you overcome this? It's actually easier in a lot of ways because you've got unmetered lights, but the electricity use is modelled. So you essentially, the electricity prices that you're paying now is just the wattage of the light multiplied by the number of lights multiplied by the time that it's on. So 11.9 odd hours in a day times 365 days in a year. So all you're doing is in the equation changing the wattage. Everything else stays the same. And we've had a lot of projects obviously completed, and they see the data in their bills a few months later instead of something being multiplied by 96, which is the real wattage of an 80 watter. It suddenly is multiplied by 18.
The Clean Energy Finance Corporation loves street lighting projects because they don't need to measure. The energy usage is essentially becomes regulated, and there are defined wattages and defined time periods that are available for all jurisdictions. So it becomes a calculation, as Lex said.
Someone in South Australia is suggesting that they've been advised to hold off on a project because they're looking at negotiating access agreements with the South Australian Power Network, so the distributor, with the local government association over there are negotiating with happen. And I think these are things that can be separated. So our advice to South Australian councils, and we've been working with a handful that have done an incredible job over the last couple of years in bringing councils and distributors to the table, and seeing, at last a bit of action. You can go through and you can undertake a model where you accept and install LEDs on one of the SAPN tariffs, and then if there is successful negotiation between the local government association and SAPN in the future, you can transition to that model. So I guess you can sort of have your cake and eat it. So for those that have persons asked that, feel free to give us a buzz. It's quite a state-specific question, but there is a model really now where you can move, and if there is a better model around the corner that you think is better, then you can jump to it. We've got about 3 or 4 more minutes left. Someone has said, what impact do you foresee the recent non-building based lighting changes to the VEET program having in terms of eligibility for council? So in Victoria, this is the Victorian Energy Efficiency Target, and quite simply, you will be able to create VEETs for street lighting in the near future. In fact, you could be able to do it now if there were street lights that had their methodology approved. So there are accredited providers. So these are organisations that can create certificates. Or you also need now the manufacturers of these lights to have their lights approved. So there was a Paul mentioned before around the state funding as well that's out there. And indeed, Victoria and New South Wales have got energy efficiency schemes where you're mad now really not to incorporate them. If you're a New South Wales council undertaking this project, you will claim New South Wales Energy Savers certificates, or ESCIs, and in Victoria, you need to keep an eye on manufacturers and making sure that they've had their lights approved. They're really, for those 2 states, that's business as usual. Yeah. Yep. Good question. With the projects that have completed the installed LED lighting, have there been measurable cost reductions in operational maintenance? Yes, depending on the state, really. The maintenance, the operational maintenance is most of the time a regulated amount, so you can have a look at, and this is very similar to the question before around the electricity costs, the number of lights times whatever that tariff, whatever that OMR, depending on the state is, and so you can quite easily determine that. In 9 of 10 areas, yes, direct maintenance savings on your next bill. There's a list of those 97 councils, pick a couple at random and give them a buzz. Or there's a couple that have got asterisks near them and we haven't worked with them, but if you want to talk to any of the others, we're more than happy to put you directly onto them if there's someone near you, and you can just ask them and say, how did it actually work, what worked, what didn't, what was learned along the way. What have we got here? 1 minute to go. When you say community consultation, I'm a councillor in a very environmentally concerned and aware community. I need to be able to answer issues around health and safety. Have there been any large studies regarding health and safety? So this could be regarding the blue-white lights. There are other health and safety issues, Paul? Yeah, listen, so for these projects, that's obviously a key question. And I guess what you're asking is community health and safety. And yes, each of the projects will look at that. The majority of the answer to it is the lighting that you put in is better, clearer and safer for anyone who is using your streets. However, that's built in usually as part of the detailed feasibility, so stage 3. The other thing is that some councils choose to spend quite a bit of time going and talking to their community, or even putting in 20 lights in a suburban street and then ask people, go and have a look, tell us what you think. And depending on the needs of the council, then that process could be the first year or 18 months of your program, where you're really just seeking feedback from the community, making sure you're ticking all those boxes first. Someone, you touched on the business case, someone from WA. How do you determine the assumptions when you're talking about electricity maintenance prices for 10 or 15 years? Great question. Often you're talking about 20-year assets. What we would generally do is have a variety of scenarios based on what is likely, or an average scenario, optimistic, and also a pessimistic scenario. So you can have a look and see what your appetite for risk is. So a pessimistic scenario, for example, would be if the LEDs maintenance costs were to increase into the future, or if electricity prices were to not increase by a lot into the future. That sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but essentially the bigger the energy price increase next year and the year after, and in 2026, 7, 8, 9, the better this project looks, because you're saving so much energy. So it's important, I think, to make sure that you have conservative assumptions. You have a look at all the different models around electricity forecasts from AMO, and there are a lot of consultants that have done work around it. You're really transparent with your assumptions and build in a bit of a buffer. That's certainly what we do. And we now are able to look back at the projects that have been completed as well, some of them that began 6, 7 years ago, get a bit of an idea about how we went on those assumptions and whether they've paid themselves back. And again, if you think you're doing this project, you can certainly give us a call anytime to talk further, or talk to a council that has completed it as well. There's quite a few questions left, but we unfortunately have hit the end of this webinar, so we'll liaise with those people directly. We will make this presentation available. We'll send a link around today or tomorrow where you can download the whole thing, give us a bit of feedback, press download, and it is yours. But we'll have to wrap our discussion there. So special thanks to Paul Brown for coming along, and to everyone who attended today's webinar. Hope that you found the conversation valuable and got some practical tips on how to get these projects implemented, and how 97 councils have already managed to change over nearly 350,000 lives. Be in touch, give us a call if you want. Otherwise, we'll catch you next time.